Belly fat is something most people struggle with losing and keeping off in the long term. When someone has a big gut and excess fat around the midsection, it's not just aesthetically displeasing, but it's also dangerous to one's overall health and well-being. Belly fat, which is a concern for millions of people, is also known as visceral or intra-abdominal fat. This type of fat affects the normal functioning of most organs and is linked to heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, and certain cancers. And the organ that's affected the first and most is the liver. Visceral organ fat is different from subcutaneous fat, like the love handles that sit on the outside and simply underneath our skin surface. We're talking about the inside fat. The main thing to know about visceral fat is that it's not about calories. Fat deposits start to accumulate in the liver first, and then it starts to spill out all around it, between other organs, filling the abdominal cavity and belly. And it's not that the fat itself is dangerous, but the way it comes about, in and around the liver, is what makes it dangerous. Hi, I'm Rishi, and thanks for stopping by my channel. I'm a practicing nutritionist with a background in human physiology and nutritional sciences. Here, I take a holistic and scientific approach to all aspects of health and wellness. I use food and lifestyle changes to optimize one's nutrition to promote longevity and healthy aging. So if you want to hack your Healthspan and be the best version of yourself, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss anything. How would you like to lose weight and body fat, especially around your belly, heal your gut, build muscle, balance your hormones, and enjoy many other health benefits? This can be achieved by changing the time window within which you eat your meals and by restricting the number of times you eat in a day, without really changing the calories you would typically ingest. Intermittent fasting has become quite mainstream over the last few years as a means to lose fat, especially around the midsection, and is a particularly good way to achieve it. It also improves body and brain health while promoting longevity. But before getting into why and how it helps in reducing it, it's important to understand the cause of belly fat. This way, we also know how to prevent it from happening again. Then it makes sense to talk about the effect that fasting has on reducing it. This way, we can truly manipulate our progress for maximal benefit. I know you've heard that eating less and exercising more is the solution to everything fat-related, but it just doesn't work like that. People are vaguely familiar with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but most are unaware as to what causes a non-alcoholic fatty liver. The short answer is it's because of fructose, or fruit sugar. But what exactly is so bad about fructose? Well, it's because it can only be metabolized and broken down by the liver. Meanwhile, the workload and effort of metabolizing and breaking down all the other fuel sources from fats, proteins, and carbs like glucose can be evenly spread out amongst all the other tissues and muscles in your body, for the most part. But the job of breaking down fructose can only be handled by going through the liver. So you're going to be that much more likely to overwhelm, congest, and overwork the liver than the rest of the body, especially when over-consuming fructose. Whatever extra energy the liver can't use in the moment gets converted into fat, which quickly starts clogging up the liver and spreading to other abdominal areas around the organs. So fructose is really the main culprit. But there's a couple of other things that make it really hard for the liver too. The hormones of insulin and cortisol. Insulin is secreted as it responds to blood glucose levels, and cortisol is the hormone produced in response to stress. In a state of stress, the body demands immediate glucose, and cortisol provides this glucose by breaking down protein stores to raise blood sugar. This in turn produces more insulin, creating a vicious cycle of elevating both insulin and cortisol. Insulin is a master hormone, and when triggered, shuts down the activity of other hormones. When elevated, your fat burning is switched off and you cannot burn any fat, period. Even though insulin is a stress in the liver, it doesn't cause belly fat and fatty liver by itself. It depends on how much insulin and how frequently the insulin is released during the day that matters. This, in conjunction with the amount of fructose consumed, is what causes excess belly fat and a fatty liver. Insulin is the storage or anabolic hormone. So once you do have belly fat and probably a fatty liver, the insulin makes it much harder to reverse either of these because the insulin keeps pushing fuel, fat, and glucose into that liver and belly fat. If you want to lose belly fat, then hit that like button to get started. Now let's talk about fructose versus carbs in general. When you eat a grain, something like rice, oats, or any form of wheat like bread, pancakes, crackers, or corn, these are all grains. And all these grains are primarily made up of starch. And starch breaks down 100% into glucose in the bloodstream. And this glucose can be spread out evenly across the body and muscles. And because it does this, glucose alone does not strain the liver and cannot give you belly fat or fatty liver by itself. It spreads fat evenly across your body when consumed in excess. Of course, glucose taken in combination with fructose can be a bad thing, but it's not going to have an effect on the liver by itself. Glucose is still a problem though because it triggers insulin, and insulin makes things worse. But the really big problem is sugar or sucrose. This is because sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose, meaning consuming 100 grams of sugar, which is quite common these days, you're really consuming 50 grams of glucose and 50 grams of pure fructose. And that is going to clog up the liver very quickly without you realizing it. Then we have high fructose corn syrup, which is a little bit worse. Instead of 50-50, it's 55% fructose and 45% glucose instead. This is one of the reasons that we see fatty liver as well as type 2 diabetes in younger and younger people, even in teens these days, as part of the obesity pandemic. This is the result of drinking sugar-laden sodas, sports, and energy drinks. Now let's talk a little about fruit. Is fruit a good or bad thing? We always hear that you should eat more fruits and vegetables, when in fact it means you should eat more vegetables. Fruit isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it should not be consumed in excess. Historically, fruit was seasonal, and depending on where you lived, you had a small selection available for a short period of the year. You just didn't have all kinds of fruit available from all over the world all year round, which is the reality now for most of us. This is what becomes problematic. As a seasonal item, there's only so much of fruit you consumed and for a limited time in the year. If you don't have belly fat and are not insulin resistant, then sure, you can have fruit more regularly. But if you are insulin resistant with a belly or have a fatty liver and are trying to reverse it, then fruits are going to slow your progress way down. So focus on vegetables. Now, this isn't to demonize fruits and tell you they don't have good nutritional content and shouldn't be eaten. I eat fruits regularly and I love fruits. The point is to perhaps not eat them daily, don't have them in large quantities or as entire meals. Be sensible, keep them in moderation, and consider having them in smaller portions alongside yogurt and salads. Fruit juices, however, are a totally different story. Think of how many oranges have to be squeezed to make 1 glass of OJ versus simply eating an entire orange as a fruit. The amount of fructose in that 1 glass compared to the fruit is easily 5 to 7 times, because that's how many oranges are needed for 1 glass of juice. Also, with juice, you lose most of its fiber content, which would usually slow down the processing time by the liver. Additionally, packaged juices typically have added sugar in it, further stressing the liver. Smoothies made with small amounts of fruit mixed with vegetables are a much better alternative to juices. Now, a bit about how stress and cortisol impact belly fat. Chronic mental stress is a functional stress keeping you in the fight or flight mode for an extended period of time, which in turn keeps your cortisol elevated chronically. This can result from various lifestyle factors like work, school, relationships, conflicts, or lack of sleep. What you see in a typical body whose cortisol is constantly elevated is a big belly, skinny legs, and a flat butt. This is because cortisol forces a breakdown of protein to produce the glucose demanded by the body as a stress response. But once the protein stores of the liver are used up, cortisol starts to break down muscle protein around the body to meet that constant glucose demand to raise your blood sugar. But the truth is, it's not actual stress, just cortisol making it look that way. And as a result, insulin has to constantly stay elevated to keep this high blood sugar in check. So this continuous stress keeps throwing your body off balance in this hypercortisol, hyperinsulinemia situation. And on top of this, when you add sugary and processed foods to your diet, your insulin stays sky high. One of the best ways to deal with stress is to practice relaxation and stretching, deep breathing exercises, and meditation. This lets your body switch off the fight or flight mode where your sympathetic nervous system is constantly running, and putting you instead into a rest and digest mode where your parasympathetic nervous system takes over, allowing your body and mind to truly relax. Having this kind of belly fat and a fatty liver implies you are almost definitely going to be insulin resistant as well. It's the same thing. A fatty liver is an insulin resistant liver. So we have to do 2 things. Obviously, one is reducing the amount of fructose and refined sugars from our diet. But it's also important to reduce the insulin in our blood, which can be done by eating foods that lower insulin, and reduce cortisol by lowering stress factors. This process of lowering insulin comes from being on a low-carb, high-fat diet. This is going to result in less insulin being produced overall. Eating lots of non-starchy, green, cruciferous, leafy vegetables, quality fats, and protein is what you're aiming for. These foods minimize the amount of insulin produced. If you want to take this a step further, then a keto diet is a stricter form of low-carb, high-fat, where the carbs only account for 5 to 10% of your total calories, mostly coming from non-starchy vegetables. The next step is to burn fat. There is lots of this in our belly, abdomen, and liver. These have to be converted for use as energy and consumed. Enter fasting. Fasting on its own can single-handedly lower insulin more than anything else you can do with diet and nutritional interventions. Adding fasting to your lifestyle is the most effective way to get rid of that belly fat. When you fast, several things happen in your body at a cellular level that help you with weight and belly fat loss. Firstly, you produce no insulin at all because you're not ingesting any food. And as long as insulin is elevated, that fat is untouchable and we can't turn it into energy. But when insulin drops, that fat can be mobilized and liberated, and it can be put into the bloodstream as free fatty acids, where it can be sent to our organs for converting into energy. Insulin sensitivity also improves as levels of insulin drop. This speeds the reversal of insulin resistance and fatty liver. The second thing that fasting does is it increases human growth hormone. And fasting is by far the most powerful way to increase growth hormone, making their levels skyrocket, increasing it as much as 5-fold or more. Human growth hormone greatly stimulates fat loss while maintaining muscle mass, as well as providing anti-aging benefits. So, in summary, when insulin goes down, it mobilizes fat. This increases human growth hormone and other fat-burning hormones, which burn the mobilized fat for energy. Hence, the longer we fast, the more fat we burn, and these mechanisms work synergistically in our favor to lower body fat. Everything gets better with fasting. Lastly, fasting also balances your appetite hormones, ghrelin and leptin, making you less hungry, so you tend to binge less and stay satiated longer. If you've never tried fasting before, then hit that like button to get started. I personally find that a low-carb, high-fat diet may be sustainable for the longest term, but is restrictive. Keto diets, although very safe and fruitful, pun intended, are overly restrictive and quite unsustainable in the long term, but perhaps a good short-term fix to get you started on your fat loss journey. Fasting, however, in my opinion, is extremely safe and very sustainable in the long term, and easy to form a habit of. Also, it's not that restrictive when it comes to food choices, since the focus is more on a shorter eating window. So, in order to burn belly fat effectively and reverse fatty liver, here are the 4 steps. Firstly, try intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, which simply means you shorten the time period in the day when you eat. This doesn't imply a change in diet necessarily, but of course, focusing on what you're consuming also matters. A popular one is 18-6, where you fast for 18 out of the 24 hours in a day and consume all your meals and calories within a 6-hour eating window. Secondly, eat a low-carb diet. The lower the carbs in your diet, the lower your insulin levels, meaning you get into that fat-burning zone much quicker and stay in it longer. Third, you want to stop all sugar, especially refined sugars and fructose. The fourth and last thing would be to work on lowering your cortisol levels, which basically means working on reducing overall stress, getting off the fight or flight mode you're on for extended periods during the day. Yoga, deep breathing exercises, stretching, and meditation are key. Now, people will definitely be wondering about exercise. It's been drilled into us, this eat less, exercise more concept. But again, it's just not about the calories. What it's actually about is the hormones and balancing those hormones. The liver can be fatty, and you could be insulin resistant with constantly high insulin, and exercise is not going to do anything. So exercise on its own can be done the right and wrong way. When done wrong, it may not hurt you, but it won't benefit you much either regarding fat loss. When done right though, while insulin is low, it greatly assists in burning the mobilized fat. Exercise also increases cortisol post-training, since cortisol is a potent anti-inflammatory needed for recovery. The problem is when you have chronically elevated cortisol to begin with, and you do things that further increase cortisol greatly. Pick activities that minimize cortisol release if you're fairly overweight. These could include steady jogs, brisk walks, and easy bike rides versus endurance activities. Weightlifting for short durations is also useful in minimizing the impact of cortisol after training. These also help increase blood circulation and fat mobilization without overstressing the body and adding to your problems. And as you start to eat properly, fast, and drop body fat, you can gradually increase the intensity and duration of exercise. This also helps prevent injuries by slowly getting your body used to working out. This is how exercise is done correctly. Thanks for watching this video. If you found value in the information I've shared, then please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Drop me a comment if you have any feedback for me. I'd really appreciate that.